as we've talked about the processes of creating, storing, and then retrieving memory, we now need to talk about what happens when something goes wrong. And there's a couple of different types of things that can go wrong that cause us to forget and the severity of forgetting. So we're going to talk about that, as well as what it means for us to, construct memories, and that they can be false, and how easily our brain likes to fill in blanks that could be faulty, right? So we'll talk about all of those things and what that means for a bunch of different areas of our reality. So forgetting is simply the inability to retrieve information due to one of three things: poor encoding, storage decay, so poor storage is the decay of the information, and then poor retrieval, whether it's you don't have proper retrieval cues, whatever it is. So have you ever heard the saying that you tie a string around your finger, or you wear like a rubber band around your wrist in order to remember something, and then you think, well, I can't remember why I have the string on my finger. It's something important. Ha, that's funny, right? We forget things, and we forget them easily. So let's talk about these three different types. An encoding failure is when we can't remember what we did not encode. We're not going to be able to remember something, which is pull something out of our brain, if it was never there in the first place, if we never encoded it in the first place. So if we aren't paying attention, or we're entering the information, when we are entering the information into our long-term memory in the first place, we're not going to be able to retrieve it later because it doesn't exist. Memory is not magic, right? And it's also the quality of the memory. And that were you just kind of passively sitting there getting the information, or were you actively processing the information and encoding it properly? Storage decay is the poor durability of stored memories that leads to their decay, yet not their deletion. It's not that they completely go away, it's just that they aren't as strong. Ebbinghaus, and this is one of the names in our standards that you have to understand, Ebbinghaus showed this with his forgetting curve. And you do need to know what his forgetting curve shows. What he showed was an initial large drop in retention, which is kind of like remembering, storing of the information. So an initial large drop in retention of information, but it evens out over time. Okay, so this is the typical forgetting curve for learning, for newly learned information. So if this is 0 days, this is when you first learn it and you get it at 100%. What that means is that you properly encoded it and you put it into long-term memory. After 1 day, you have a very the quickest drop of forgetting. This says that what you are learning right now, tomorrow, you're going to have your most significant amount of forgetfulness, you could say, of storage decay than you will for the rest of your life. Kind of interesting. So what does that say about how much you're actually getting from these videos or from any traditional lecture or activity you do in school? You've got to have more effort and more active processing, because you're going to forget some things. But the more active you are in processing, the less you're likely to forget. So back to the forgetting curve, you forget the most in the first day. When you have reviewed, which is each of these like peaks, right? You review the information, you forget less. You review the information, you forget way less. You review the information, you forget less. So what it's saying is that over time it will kind of steady out. But what you see in this forgetting curve is that at each of these points, you are reviewing the information. You're not just letting it sit there. If you don't review the information, this trajectory going down is going to steeply go down. It's going to keep going down if you don't review the information. They believe this to be due to the gradual fading of the memory trace in the brain. Remember what we talked about, the memory trace with the engram, right? With long-term potentiation, it's the strengthening of the synaptic connections between neurons. The connections aren't as strong and efficient as they were when you first learned them. So you've got to be, that's why you have to review the information. You've got to be going over and reusing the information to make those synapses stronger, long-term potentiation. Retaining Spanish, Barek in 1984 showed a pattern similar to that of Ebbinghaus with forgetting and retention of Spanish vocabulary over 50 years. So this is time in years after completion of Spanish course. So say it's like Spanish 1 in high school, right? And you get it. You understand the vocabulary. It's all retained. look at how quickly in the first, 2 years or 3 years after learning it, it goes down, but then it kind of levels off. Sure, there's a slight decrease, but what you remember after those first 2 years kind of maintains itself. And then finally, a retrieval failure. Although the information is retained in memory store, it cannot be accessed. Okay, so it's in there. You're just having some kind of failure in getting it out. An example of a retrieval failure is tip of the tongue. Tip of the tongue is a retrieval failure phenomenon, meaning you know it is there, you just can't bring the information out. So I say, who's that actor in that movie? And you're like, oh my gosh, I totally know who it is. It's right there. I just can't think of his name. What is it? What is it? What is it? If I were to show you a picture, that would be the proper cue, you could say, and you would get it. But that would be just tip of the tongue, and that you don't have the proper cues to help you get it out, and that would be a retrieval failure. So let's talk about a type of forgetting other than those three kind of failures that we talked about. Interference. Okay, so learning some information may disrupt retrieval of other information. So as you are learning more and more and more, as you're getting more and more information in there, stuff starts interfering with each other when you try to bring something specific out, when you try to retrieve it and use it. So there's two types of interference. Proactive, the way that I want you to think of proactive interference is like when you're being proactive, you are moving forward, right? Like I'm being proactive to try and prevent lots of illness by eating healthy and exercising. You're being proactive, you're moving forward, right? So proactive interference is when old information kind of moves forward and it interferes with new information. Okay? So if the old information is interfering with remembering the new information, that means you do remember the old, which blocks your retrieval of the new. And I want you to write that down. Proactive interference is when you are remembering the old information and it blocks the retrieval of new information. Make sure you have that written down. So let me give you an example. Let's say your cell phone was stolen, you had to get a new phone and a new number, but whenever someone asks for your number, you still give out your old one. Okay, so you're trying to like give out your new number, but you keep starting to say your old one. That would be proactive interference. Retroactive interference, think of like moving backwards. Retro, like Throwback Thursday or something like that, right? Like retroactive interference. This is when learning the new information interferes with the recall of older information. So it kind of moves backwards, right? So if it's the new information interfering with the old, you are remembering the new information, write this down, that then blocks the retrieval of the old information. The new information blocks the retrieval of the older information. Let me give you an example. Currently, you're in a calculus class, let's say. You can't remember how to solve a geometry question when your younger sibling asks for help. Yet, because you're so focused on calculus and remembering that, you're so wrapped up in that, your brain is, that you go to, like, I don't know, do some algebra, A plus B equals C or something or other, and you're like, oh my golly, I like totally don't even remember. I can't think of it. I know it. Okay, that would be retroactive interference. So sleep. Let's talk about sleep and how that can kind of help. Sleep will help you avoid retroactive interference, thus leading to better recall. So study before you go to bed for a test in the morning. So the idea is not just, it doesn't say that if you stay up really late and you cram all night long that you'll remember better tomorrow. It says if you study, it doesn't even say if you study the night before. It says that what you have learned during the day, and let's say you do some homework and studying until like, I don't know, 9 o'clock at night, and then you get a good night's sleep, just having slept is going to improve your memory. And that's what this graph here shows. So hours lapse after learning the nonsense syllables being words that make no sense. And that after sleep, their retention of that information is much higher than after remaining awake. In fact, what they show is that if you take, let's say you learn something in class today, you take a test on it tonight, you sleep, take a test on it tomorrow, your test score tomorrow will be better. I find that incredibly intriguing. Motivated forgetting. And you're like, what? People are motivated to forget? Well, we're talking about Freud the Freak here, and he's got some stuff to say about our unconscious and latent kind of meaning of things and the hidden underlying what's going on with our craziness, right? So motivated forgetting. People unknowingly will revise their memories. And I totally buy into this part of what Freud is telling us. We don't remember items that we don't want to remember. So this doesn't mean that someone's lying. Okay? This does not mean that someone is lying. What it means is that they are motivated to forget certain things that they don't want to remember, so they're not going to recall them as easily. And repression, you could say, is a kind of an example of this. This is a defense mechanism we're going to talk about a couple units from now, that banishes, gets rid of anxiety-arousing thoughts, feelings, and memories from our conscious mind. So it pushes those yucky, I hate those traumatic memories into our unconscious so that we don't have to be thinking about them in our reality on a day-to-day basis. So why do we forget? It can occur at any memory stage. We filter, we alter, or we lose much information during these stages with sensory memory and the short-term memory, long-term, and then the retrieval of it. So I kind of like this graphic over here of this is the bits of information in sensory memory. Well, we don't want to take all those in, so we only pay attention to a few of them that are important to us. We work with them. And then what we have worked with, which is much less than what was in our short-term memory, goes to our long-term. And then due to storage decay and other factors, only a few of those can even come out.